Hello, everyone. I'm Eliana Gonzalez, and welcome to the first episode of GreenTalks, Exomad Green's new podcast, where we dive into the CDR market and spotlight the key players shaping this industry. For this episode, we have an outstanding lineup. Diego Justiniano, CEO and founder of Exomad Green, and our special guest, Daniel Sierra, Compliance Director at puro.earth. Daniel brings an impressive background in law, governance, and international development, having served as counselor at the Inter-American Development Bank and held leadership roles across government programs and think tanks. He later joined puro.earth to lead business development for the Americas and now safeguards market integrity as compliance director. Daniel, it's great to have you with us. How are you? And for those who may not know you yet, could you tell us a little bit more about you?
Of course, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here in Bolivia. First time in my life, first time in Santa Cruz. Thank you very much. And I actually do feel very welcomed by everyone in the country and in the organization, and I'm very grateful for that.
Glad to hear that.
A little bit about me. I'm a lawyer by training. I have been working in policy and international development for a little bit over a decade. And for the past 5 years, I have been very focused on carbon removal. Carbon removal, as your audience may know, is actually capturing CO2 that it's already in the atmosphere and sequestering it for a very long period of time. It could be minimum 100 years and hopefully forever. By capturing CO2 from the atmosphere, we can actually help reach the Paris Agreement temperature goals of between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. It is essential to have CDR at scale for humanity to be able to achieve our Paris Agreement goals and be able to stop climate change on its track.
Very interesting. Now, on the other side, we have Diego Justiniano. Diego, how are you? And for our audience, could you share a bit more about you and about Exomad Green?
Sure. Thank you, Elu. Well, I'm Diego Justiniano, CEO of Exomad Green. And basically, we started Exomad Green in 2022 with a deep and important vision to be leading the way in biochar. Biochar carbon removal, I think it's a technology that today provides not only the sequestering of carbon, but also the scale that the world needs right now. We were the first company to prove the concept that we could scale to important amounts. We have a major agreement with Microsoft for 1.27 million tons, but also I think that the core vision of Exomad Green is to continuously improve itself and showcase how biochar carbon removal can be done at scale with integrity, with timely delivery. That's the core vision of Exomad Green.
Daniel, tell us a bit about your journey. How did you first enter the CDR space and what eventually led you to puro.earth?
Of course. So when I started as a lawyer, I started practicing energy law. And when I started working on policy, I was working on energy. And then from 2015 onwards, I was working on how are we going to be able to fulfill our energy needs in the context of the Paris Agreement. So that led me to working on the energy transition, and specifically in the Inter-American Development Bank, I was working on the energy transition portfolio and infrastructure portfolio for climate change. That rapidly led me to understand that emission reductions are not enough to be able to achieve our net zero goals that are enshrined in the Paris Agreement. And that in order to close the gap between what we can do with emission reductions and what we need to do in order to reach our temperature goals, we need to get to carbon removal. So back in 2021, puro.earth was a Finnish-based certification, carbon crediting certification program that issued credits for 3 projects that Microsoft was purchasing credits from. And I emailed the founders of puro.earth back in 2021, and I became the first non-Finnish based employee of puro.earth. And from that moment on, I was always trying to see how can we get to CDR at scale. In Latin America, we have excellent opportunities to do that because of the availability of biomass and because of the needs of the agricultural sector. Very acidic soils, which are perfect for biochar, for instance. And that led me to accelerate the business development side of puro.earth in Latin America, and eventually led me to establish contact with Exomad.
So basically, Exomad, the Exomad Group, began its journey back in 2011. We started as a wood company in the sustainable wood sector. So we initially began in 2011 with the processing of lumber, then we grew into veneer, musical parts and pieces. Now we have divisions of musical instruments, flooring, and so on and so forth, furniture. So basically, throughout that journey, we noticed huge amounts of waste that got generated from the sustainable forestry industry. Basically, between 50 to 60% of the raw material gets turned into waste. It doesn't matter if it's processed here in the US, in China, in Europe, the technology is all the same, and you always have the waste. So that being said, it was a primary challenge that needed to be solved. How to use that waste at scale and solve the problem of pollution that turned. In sophisticated industry like ours, we have different ways to how to manage the waste, basically, without contaminating. But that's not the reality everywhere where we go. And we work in rural communities, we work in the very difficult to reach areas, in towns that had real world problems with contamination. And that was the key motivation for Exomad Green. Through that journey of finding these huge amounts of waste, we basically studied many different ways of how to solve this, by making energy, by making X, Y, and Z. But the one that really, triggered with us was biochar. In 2021, we came up with the solution of biochar with our project leader and now chief production officer, which is Marcelo Pereira. He brought the idea to the table, which is biochar. At the beginning, we first didn't understand the concept, but it very quickly made a click with us because that really provided a solution of not only capturing CO2 and storing it safely for hundreds to thousands of years, but also of solving a real problem in the world, which is contamination, and bringing a ton of co-benefits to the communities in which we operate. So that's the beginning, basically, of how this all happened. Now, of course, it came with challenges. We were the first company to have an industrial scale facility with 3 reactors. Back in 2022, when we took the decision to start building, there was no single facility in the world at that scale. We were the first company to reach first the 60,000 tons of corks being delivered per year, then jumped to 120. Now we are at 250,000 tons. We are in the process of building right now 500,000 tons by next year, mid next year, and by 2027, 1,000,000 or a megaton, which is going to be the first company in the world to do it. So that being said, it drives many, many challenges, which are financing. How can we sell a story to the bank that this is a bankable project? It's not easy because the industry was not developed yet. Luckily, we had the backing of a strong company like ours, already established in different divisions, and we took the risk and, actually convinced the banks to help us on that side. So basically, once we solved the financing part, once we solved the technological part, we came to, who's going to buy our CDRs? And that's where we met Daniel, basically, and he told us, you should go in there. That's going to be an easy piece of cake, which it wasn't. But at the end of the day, you have to always take a risk. If you don't take a risk, if you don't jump onto the project that you truly believe in, you will never do it. And at the end of the day, that's what happened to us after a couple of months of being in production at scale, delivering, and proving ourselves to the market. Everything kept going, And now today, luckily, we are the largest supplier of BCR credits in the world, and the market is recognizing not only Exomad Green as a leader in the industry, but also Bolivia as a key player in the world.
This industry sounds a little bit like science fiction, because what we're doing is that we're capturing CO2 from the atmosphere and locking it away for several centuries and hopefully forever. And not everyone realizes that this can be done. Most people think that direct climate mitigation is just reducing emissions. It sounds like science fiction to be able to actually capture the CO2 from the atmosphere and lock it away, hopefully forever. So it is, risky to be able to bet that you can actually convince people that this is something that will be needed and that you can provide it. And I think that, with great risks come also great rewards, and it is what Exomad has been able to show. Not only the scale of the ambition, but also the ability to provide the evidence that what they are doing is actually providing the climate benefit that it is claimed. And, testament to that is the ability that Exomad has had not only to get the credits issued, but the credits bought by very important buyers that do their own due diligence, that are very sophisticated on what they're actually purchasing, on what they're actually doing, because they are committed to climate action. So I think that, yes, risky, but with great risk also comes great rewards if you do things well.
Okay, and Daniel, where does puro.earth stand today regarding biochar? Where is the company headed, and how does Exomad Green fit into that long-term vision? What does this visit you made add to that picture?
Sure. So biochar is today the technology that is the most ready to be able to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and lock it away for several centuries at scale. And it's, great to see it because you can visualize it, that the CO2 is in the atmosphere as a gas, plants capture it and turn it, into sugars, and then eventually the carbon stays in the biomass. This biomass was being burned as a waste management only option in the region, and now instead of maintaining this baseline of the carbon just being combusted and going to the atmosphere with the particulate matter, sickening the people of the communities that are there, now this carbon is locked, thermochemically treated, and turned it into biochar that you can see with a carbon content. Most of what you see in the biochar is actually carbon. The carbon that was in the air is now there in front of your eyes. It's all black. And now instead of combusting it, you're just putting it inside the earth in order to increase agricultural yield and lock that carbon for several centuries. So puro.earth saw very rapidly, and let me tell the audience a little bit more about puro.earth. Puro.earth is a carbon crediting program that writes methodologies, rules, in order to allow project developers to provide evidence that they're compliant with these rules. And after managing the entire certification process, we issue the carbon credits that are then transacted in the international market. So, because this is the function of puro.earth in the market, Puro rapidly saw that biochar, since it's the most ready technology today, that it made sense to be the leader of the certification industry around biochar carbon removal credits. And we are, by far, the leader of biochar certification for CDR in the world. And when you see the offtake agreements and the pledges that many companies have made in order to purchase CDR credits, biochar is leading the way worldwide. So puro.earth believes in biochar as the most ready pathway. It's not the only pathway, but we invested very heavily to be leaders in this market segment because it's what's ready at scale right now.
Great insights, Daniel. Thank you. Now, flipping the question, Diego, what does puro.earth bring to Exomad Green, and why is that partnership so important for the success of your project?
Well, pure.earth brings to Exomad Green, first of all, the backbone under which all the credits are basically issued. It's the standard for the largest standard for the biochar carbon removal market, and it brings trust, credibility, and also the experience with a highly trained team of professionals, researchers, and people to actually do this. So basically, pure.earth brought the opportunity to Exomad Green to be able to start on this market, to make this a real market, which is the most important part, because we can, have a concept of something, but if there's no trust behind that, there's not going to be buyers and suppliers. And I think that's the key part that Puro brings, trust.
Trust, okay. Thank you, Diego. Now a question for both of you. In the context of this visit, what defines a high-quality carbon credit? I understand it's not only about the product itself, but also about co-benefits and broader impact. Diego?
Perfect. So in Exomad Green's point of view, a high-quality carbon credit not only needs to prove the worth of sequestering CO2, without any level of doubt, with proof, with credibility, with a wide amplitude of transparency, which we do, but also we need to bring a series of co-benefits to the community. For us, that's very important because we are not only sequestering CO2, but we are also benefiting the local communities in which we operate. And I think that's the backbone of Exomad Green as well. Sequestering CO2, but helping people as well. So in the communities where we operate, we run a series of programs. First of all, agricultural programs, because as the audience may know, biochar, it's also a soil amendment, and a tremendous one. It holds 50 to 60% capacity, its weight in retention of water. So basically, it provides a tremendous help to the soil on the dry periods. And in Bolivia, we have, several unimportant droughts, basically. But not only that, as Daniel was saying priorly, in South America, we have highly acidic soils, and we need to amend those soils with different products. But biochar, aside of only not, helping with the water retention in the soil, it also has a neutral pH. And by having this neutral pH, it brings the pH to a basic neutrality, and that helps the yield. So, we can go on and on the agricultural impacts that we have, but the result is something. We have an average of 15% increase on all the different applications that we have. In some we have more, in some we have a little bit less, but an average of 15% is a real tangible benefit to the agricultural community. So by applying that for free, which we do, biochar from Exomad Green is donated for free to the rural communities in which we operate. We are helping with the agricultural programs that need to be run in all the places where we operate. Also, we have a major program, which is the health program. So, as we were explaining priorly, the origin or the baseline of our raw material is the waste from the sustainable forestry sector. That used to be burned in open pits, because here there's no use in these rural communities for the excess biomass that was available there. So when their yards of the sawmills were filled with waste, what can they do? They turn it into this open pit and they burn it. You can imagine that in towns like Concepcion, Riberalta, Guarayos, where we operate in the facility right now, you have 40, 50, 60 sawmills of these all throughout the town. And if you can imagine 24/7, 365 days of burning, you're going to have pollution all year long in those towns. And that brings tremendous health hazards to the community. So right now we have studies from not only the municipal hospitals in the towns where we operate, but also from several of our customers, which certify the reduction that we had in the pollution on the air, in the contamination being done to these communities, and that translates a direct impact on IRA, which is acute respiratory infections on the community, in the eye infections, which basically range from 60 to 90% decrease in these communities on these particular health issues. And that brings a even more important benefit, which is that if the doctors are not worried about these infections, or at least it's taking part of their time, they can focus in much more important parts that the community needs. And that gives availability to, in some places, very limited resources that they have. So I think that Exomad Green is playing a key role on that. And as I was saying, with credit from Exomad Green, we are not only sequestering carbon, which is our main mission, but we're also helping the local communities in several programs, such as the ones I mentioned.
Wonderful, Diego. Now, Daniel, now you.
Same question.
What defines a high-quality carbon credit?
Of course. So I see it as, a two-part answer. You have the carbon answer, so the climate change specific answer, and then you have, all the co-benefits that Diego was mentioning. In order for a credit to be a high-quality credit on the carbon accounting side, on the climate change impact, you need to have transparency, traceability. You need to be able to provide the evidence of all of your entire process in a way that it can not only be certified, but it can also be shown to third-party actors, of course, to the potential buyers of the credits, but not only to the buyers of the credits, to the stakeholders that are interested in understanding all the tiny pieces of the carbon accounting that are, the underlying data of the carbon credit. So you need to make sure with these elements that the claim that you're making, that, one credit is 1 ton of CO2 removed from the atmosphere, net from all the emissions that were required in order to create the credit, this is what, the first answer is. You need to make sure that all this, that this claim is backed by data that is transparent, traceable, and with a system that, provides the evidence for it. First part. Second part is what Diego was mentioning, which are co-benefits that go beyond climate change. And these benefits are, I wouldn't say difficult to certify, but these are benefits that are not certified with the same logic as the carbon accounting part of the answer. So for instance, Diego was mentioning, and I was struck in the site visit to the hospital with the discussion of the chief medical doctor of the hospital. The acute respiratory infections were the #1 intervention that the hospital was, that the hospital was treating before, in the year 2022 and backwards in time. And we're talking about thousands of cases in a single year. As Diego mentioned, after Exomad started to change the baseline from combustion to sequestration, and therefore the smoke, it is difficult to comprehend how tough this situation was when the people of Concepcion and the places where Exomad eventually will be able to operate are breathing smoke from the combustion of this material that had no further use, and that's why it was being combusted. And then this reduction from 60 to 90% of the cases involved that not only the hospital was able to treat other more acute or other diseases and cases in general, but also that of each of these respiratory acute infections, the doctor told me that 30% of the patients were interned for 7 days in order to be able to treat with antibiotics these infections. This is a very large public charge that the municipality and the hospital needed to tackle. And without public money, without taxpayers' dollars, just as a co-benefit of the activity that Exomad is doing, now these acute respiratory infections are no longer there. At 60 to 90% reduction. Can we certify this? Yes. It is not the role of Puro because we are on the carbon accounting side, but that does not make it any less real. And when you combine high-quality carbon accounting and high-quality co-benefits, you have a high-quality credit.
Daniel, you said this is your first time in Bolivia, so welcome to Bolivia.
Thank you.
You're here for a side visit. How has the experience been so far?
Well, I am incredibly grateful to be able to be here in Bolivia, to have been invited by Exomad to look at their facilities. I think it is essential to be able to be at the places, where the action is taking place in order to understand the magnitude of what is happening. So I am incredibly grateful because it has not been a Disney tour. This has been a very, detail-oriented, intense activity where we have gone throughout the entire supply chain of how the credits of Exomad are, shown in its evidence. So for me, of course, the biggest, I wouldn't say surprise, but the biggest shock is to see the magnitude of the scale of the production facilities of Exomad. It is really large. And then the most insightful part of the visit for me, beyond getting to know all the Exomad team, was to go to the sustainable forestry operations and see, while walking in the forest, how is the sustainable normative framework being implemented in order to be able to get sustainable biomass as part of the input for the CDR process. So I was incredibly grateful to be able to go with forestry engineers, to be able to discuss with the local authorities how the sustainability of the biomass is fiscalized, what is needed in order to understand their plans for the future on how to increase their capacity. But Bolivia is really advanced in terms of the normative framework of the sustainability of biomass that, since the late 90s, it has had a lot of international cooperation to have a very robust system of traceability. And I think that one thing is to, read the documents, read the evidence, And another thing is actually to walk the forest, to be able to see the markings in the trees, to be able to understand on site the logic of what makes the sustainability of the operation as so. So I think there is no way to understand this theoretically. You need to come. You need to go to the place and actually walk around and be able to understand with your whole cognitive abilities what is happening. And therefore, I'm incredibly grateful for Exomad for having invited me to come and for their openness, their transparency, to not do a scripted tour of their operations, but to let me, roam around, ask any question, and see everything, critically in an assessment perspective, and just really have transparency on how their operations work.
And talking about being on that places, what is the importance of the visits for Exomad, Diego?
Well, I think the most important part of the visits from all the stakeholders that are on the market, if it's buyers, if it's a Puro with Daniel, if it's other producers coming here, it's first of all, we have an open doors policy, so it's transparency. And I think that's critical for the market. This is a very a market that depends on transparency. So that being said, I think it's not only a tour that we do, but it's an obligation that we have with the market itself to be transparent and to show how everything is being done. So while Daniel was here, we did, several things throughout the visit. Some things planned and others not, right? So that being said, I think it's critical for Exomad to show, first of all, the origins of the biomass, which is a sustainable forestry management behind where the actual biomass or the waste biomass is coming from. And that takes us to the sustainable forestry management areas where the sawmills and our operations harvest the wood sustainably and how it comes to the places where they get transformed, where the product comes out and the waste get left. And that's critical for us to show because there's always, a thing about, it's in Latin America, it's in Bolivia, it's here and that, and deforestation. And we need to be extremely transparent on how this is not only, first of all, not causing any damage to the forest, but actually helping it. And secondly, we're tackling deforestation because the product that we produce at the end of the day is going to improve the yields on the areas where we operate, and that's going to, by increasing the yields, create a higher production on those areas, and therefore there's no need for further expansion on the agricultural areas. So that being said, once we went to the forest and verify the whole sustainability operation, then we go to the sawmills and to showcase the baseline scenario of what is happening in the sawmills and how these tremendous amounts of waste wood generation, if we don't pick it up, if we don't take it, if we don't provide that service of actually taking the raw material and bringing it to our facilities, it will get burned, and that's what we spoke before. So that showcases our baseline scenario. And then we go to the facilities. And as Daniel was saying, it's one thing to see it on paper, to see a small video, to see some pictures, and there's a different reality when you see it on site. Because everybody thinks that, okay, we can do a megaton, a gigaton, I've heard this everywhere, But to see how one facility that actually captures 120, 140, 160,000 tons of CO2, the magnitude that it has, the quantity of people, of collaboration that needs to be done to actually make that happen, And then you need to scale this in multiple facilities to be able to reach the megaton by 2027 that we have. It's really an impressive coordination that you need to have, but an impressive team that we are also very happy that to have in Exomad Green. So once we actually see the facilities, then we also need to see where's our sink site, which is a very important part. Because to create a carbon removal credit in biochar, you not only need to produce the biochar, but you need to store it safely in a place where it's not going to get burnt, basically, and release back the CO2, forever, basically, until it lasts. So we use as our sink site the agricultural community in the areas where we operate. So that being said, we of course go to the fields where the biochar is being applied. We talk to our application team. We see the results that it has, and they are backed by not only our lab and our agricultural team on site, but also with the real community that's feeling the benefit. So, yeah, we basically try to do a whole tour, let's call it, but it's not actually a tour. It's more like an open doors tour that our visitors get to see the whole 9 yards of Exomad Green's operation. So that's the importance for us. As I was saying, transparency, open doors policy, that's the backbone of Exomad's operation, and that's what we're very pleased to showcase.
Amazing. Well, after that tour, Daniel, what stood out to you the most during your visit?
I would say the magnitude of the project, the magnitude of the ambition of the project. I would say the co-benefits such as the health co-benefit that we were discussing before, of the decrease of the acute respiratory infections. That was really incredible to discuss it with the medical chief officer of the hospital and learning from him how it has evolved. I think that the ambition of the local authorities, of the regional authorities, of the national government of Bolivia, which I think has right now a great mandate to move forward, to lead the way in climate change, not only in the region but worldwide. I think there is a huge opportunity for that, and you can see the ambition from the authorities of Bolivia to do so. I think that was also very impressive. So you have a combination of private sector ambition, you have a combination of local communities being benefited by the project and therefore embracing the project, and you also have the authorities with the mindset of a public-private partnership to be able to advance climate ambition in the country. I think those are very powerful elements that I was very impressed to see in action, and how they interact to make this project a project that really can provide at scale the service of CDR that the world needs.
Any closing remarks, Diego?
Well, yes. So, first of all, I want to make a call of action. Exomad Green serves as an example of how a technology that's ready to be deployed today, such as biochar, can be deployed at scale and deliver high-quality integrity carbon credits with a range of co-benefits to the community. So that being said, I encourage suppliers to take this example. Think of biochar not only as a carbon removal tool, but think of biochar, a biochar project, as the challenge that it is. And you need to resolve 3 main challenges. First, logistical challenge of where your raw material is. You need to think that it needs to be in an area which is relatively easy, because you are going to handle thousands and thousands of tons of biomass. Secondly, you need to have, or at least hire, industrial capacity. These are real, huge facilities that need to be deployed at scale, and you're going to need to have industrial capacity to do so. And third, going back to the initial challenge, you're going to have another big challenge, which is logistics again, to take the final product of biochar and apply it in the zinc site. So you need to have a logistical capacity to do so and to have the zinc site available also on a relatively close area near your facilities. So that being said, once you resolve these things, biochar, for us, it's the way to move forward. There are other technologies right now available, and we encourage every single technology to be done and deployed because the world needs it right now. But if you take our example in biochar, follow these simple 3 steps, I think you're going to have a successful biochar project. And as we are doing it today here in Bolivia, you can do it anywhere in the world.
Perfect. Daniel?
Well, I would like first to start by thanking Exomad and Bolivia, all the local authorities and the local communities that had me this week. I've been privileged to be here this week in Bolivia. And then I would also like to echo Diego's words on a call to action. My call to action would be for the climate community and for the private sector of the world that carbon dioxide removal from the atmosphere is unavoidable to reach our climate targets. It is unavoidable. It is not puro.earth or any private organization that says so. It is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We cannot wait until the year 2050 to have carbon removal at scale. We need to incentivize carbon removal today. Exomad will soon be able to have the capacity to produce 1 million credits of CDR. That is not enough for what the world needs. We're going to need at least 10,000 Exomads to be able to be operating in 20 years. The world needs to incentivize carbon dioxide removal today, not in 10 years, not in 20 years. And of course, it is, difficult to, make the investments required to incentivize carbon dioxide removal, but there is no option. We can only achieve our temperature goals by having CDR operating at the gigaton level scale by 2050, and it doesn't start in 2050, it starts today.
And thank you, Daniel, for taking the time to visit us here in Bolivia. I know it's not an easy trip, from Washington all the way to Bolivia, but thank you really for taking the time. Hopefully you can come soon, and we can have many other visitors as well from different parts of the CDR community.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you both. It's been a pleasure discussing all these topics from the site visit, market integrity, the future of biochar, and the collaboration between Exomad Green and puro.earth. This conversation highlights how essential transparency, innovation, and partnership are for scaling meaningful climate solutions. To both of you, Daniel and Diego, thank you for your insights. Thank you for the work you're leading in the CDR space. And thank you for joining us for the first episode of GreenTalks.